1. Chapter 1. Mardi Gras Zombie. Waking up never felt so good. I rolled over on the blankets I had turned into a nest and stared at my 2 children sleeping back to back. The morning sun was lighting up the room, and I watched their faces begin to form out of the shadows. Asleep they looked younger, less worried. Too thin, but then didn't we all? There was only one thing missing. Number 3, my youngest daughter. She was born with my second wife and lived with her mother and stepfather in Florida. When the government announced the mandatory evacuation, they climbed into a car and drove north into the Carolinas. I stayed in Orlando in a sort of vapor lock. By the time I decided to do something like go find my children, I was torn. I still was. Maybe going to Arkansas first was a mistake. But then maybe had I gone to the Carolinas, it would have been an argument with her mother, while my oldest daughter starved to death tied to a tower, and my son was turned into a zombie waiting for her to come back. They were safe, the 2 with me. Luck had been on my side. It would stay with me when we went to look for tea. Some might say luck was being cruel, even if she was on my side. I had scars from my journey, and the fight yesterday with a couple of giants hell-bent on me dying didn't help. I wished for aspirin and morphine, and maybe a healing massage from Anna. Her tender ministrations had pulled me through worse. I watched the boy's eyes flicker open, and when they focused on me, he gave a tiny little grin. "You're still here." I nodded. I wanted to tell him always. But that hadn't been the case while he was growing up. I was there once a month during the school year, for 6 weeks each summer, and a week over winter break. Never enough time. I could blame work or the second ex. But that just made me mad. They say, if you want to control your life, take full responsibility for everything that happens in it. I said it. I repeated it. I wanted to live it. I just didn't until after the Z apocalypse. My control now came from focus. I was going to find my kids and keep them safe. I was 2/3 of the way there. And nothing was going to stop me from reaching 100%. Them stirred at his voice. I never called my kids by their real names, but nicknames based off their actuals. Them was my 15-year-old. World-wise and a lot like me, she looked just like her mother. Long brown hair braided in a plait down her back. Short gymnast build. She was wicked smart and little miss popular at school. Had been. "I'm hungry," she said in a low voice. "Trapped on a tower will do that to you, Rapunzel." She lifted on one elbow and dug in a pack with her other hand. "Beans," she sighed. "Get used to it." I took the can from her and opened it by twisting a metal opener. It was a heck of a lot easier than using the tip of a knife. "Cold beans," she gagged. "No time for fire. We're getting out of here." I almost went over the plan with them, but they just nodded. "We were waiting for you," said the boy. "We almost thought you weren't going to make it." I ran a finger along the scar on my head. Almost didn't. Someone tried to shoot me there and missed. Gave me a nice new part for my hairstyle. I divvied the beans up into 3 helpings that were little more than a couple of spoonfuls each. We had enough for dinner, but we were going to need to make a scavenger run again soon. 2. Chapter 2. By soon I meant on the way to the marina. I had outlined a plan in my mind the day before, and after spending the night thinking about it, it had solidified into action steps. I let the kids pack up a few things, blankets, and was silently pleased when they put books into their packs. One of the things I was most proud of with all 3 was a love of reading, and even if their tastes skewed different from mine, at least they learned that by watching me. I added find a bookstore or library to our to-do list at some point in the future, once we settled somewhere. Rebuilding society wasn't on my agenda, but staying entertained until someone else did was. We found a spot in the fence where the Z hadn't clustered and took off at a fast walk up the street into the neighborhood. I didn't want to make too much noise beating on the doors of houses, but we had to hunt for food to take with us. The first 3 houses had open doors, so we skipped them. The next 2 had red X's painted on the windows. What does that mean? They both shrugged. Gang stuff, the boy offered. Gang stuff meant the guys we ran into yesterday, or more like them. It also meant that they either claimed the houses or were warning people away. The kids followed me through the yard to one of the windows, and I peeked in, but couldn't see anything. I rapped on it with my knuckle, and a rotten hand smacked against the glass on the other side. An emaciated Z head peered over the windowsill, searching for the source of the noise. One of us squealed. In the retelling of the story, I said it was Bem. The boy giggled as we walked away, but at least we had an answer to what the X meant. Though I think they should have marked it Z instead. It would have made more sense. The rest of the houses on the street were marked in a similar fashion. Open door or red X. They didn't harass you at the school. We had a couple of kids who lived in the neighborhood and went to the school with us, Bem answered. Maybe they kept us safe. She still looked weak. The tiny dinner and minuscule breakfast hadn't helped restore her depleted energy, and I fought a momentary twinge of failure. It made me resolve to provide even more. I led the kids toward the river and to an apartment complex, built a block or so back from the mini-mansions. The doors here were unmarked, which meant the gang hadn't made it this far, or the places were already empty. We went to the top floor and started knocking on doors and pressing our ears against them to listen for noise on the other side. Well-meaning relatives had locked some people in their homes in hopes of a cure, or others had locked themselves inside and died quietly before going Z. That had been my experience savaging so far in other parts of the country. I couldn't see why Arkansas would be any different. It wasn't. I had scratching behind mine, long drawn-out strokes against the other side of the metal door. The boy shook his head. He heard the same thing. Bem moved from her door to the next, and that was answer enough. On the last door, we didn't hear anything. I kicked in the doorknob and stood waiting, pistol drawn. Nothing came out of the dark interior. Wait, I said and stepped inside. The setup was simple. A galley kitchen just off the door, a half bar separating the dining living space that led to a balcony overlooking the river. The light from the door illuminated half the room, enough that I didn't trip over anything as I made my way to the vertical blinds and pulled them, flooding the room with sunshine. Black leather couch in front of a 60-inch television, small 2-person table. Shut the door, I told the kids, and they followed me in. I checked out the bedroom. Empty, as was the bathroom. Check the clothes, I told the boy. See if anything fits. He nodded and went shopping. See if the bathroom has medicine, supplies. Take it all. Bem followed him. I went into the kitchen and searched the cabinets. It wasn't quite a jackpot, but we had hit pay dirt in the form of ramen noodles, macaroni and cheese boxes, and 8 packages of spaghetti noodles and sauce. I stacked the haul out on the counter, dividing it up into meals, and grinned. We had enough food for a week, almost all pasta. But pasta was good since it carried well. There were random cans of veggies, a bag of rice, and a bottle of soy sauce. All of that carried well too. I dug around for a pot, poured my water in it, and dumped in noodles to let them soak. Then I checked on the kids. Bem had a duffel bag full of items from the bathroom, and both kids were trying on clothes. They were too big by far, and a big pile of the cast-offs were on the bed. I found food. They cheered softly. I checked the closet and found a rolling suitcase for the food, and another for the bedding. I shoved all the clothes into a pile in the corner and rolled the bedding tight, stuffed it in the larger suitcase. Why? The boy asked. We have blankets. It's going to get colder, and we don't want to get caught without, I told him. At least until we find a tent and other supplies. I think before the Z, they would have had more questions. Would have wanted to know more of the plan, where we would end up, and the how of things. Zombies have a way of making you focus on just the present moment, just the survival. I hated it. But there was a zen to it. Focus on the now. The past is gone and the future isn't yet. Breath in, breath out. We ate cold noodles and cold red sauce, sitting at the table and couch. I noticed the boy made sure Bem had extra, and felt a surge of pride. The color in her cheeks perked up, and I felt more energy too. They both were smiling more. We hauled the suitcases into the hall, and double-checked to make sure who was carrying what items. We only had to cross the street and go past the mansions to the marina on the river, but I only wanted to make one trip. I grabbed the knob, opened the door, and startled one of the boys from Fort Roots on the landing. He shouted and pulled a gun from his waistband. I booted him in the chest, flipped him over the rail, and his scream lasted 1 second until he thudded into the ground. Long enough to tell his buddies where we were. A bullet gouged into the doorframe. Back. I shoved the kids back over the suitcases and slammed the door. Bullets ripped through the upper edge of the metal as the rest of the gang closed in. The kids dragged the suitcases behind the bar and cowered. I looked around, grabbed the TV and waddled it up the hall to lean against the door. It wasn't much, but it would block the hallway. I ran back to the couch, tipped it over on its side, and shoved it on top of the TV against the door. More blockage. Then I checked the balcony. We 3 stories up, but there was an open balcony below us, and a patio below that. I went back in, grabbed the suitcases. Come on, I huffed. We went on the balcony as bodies slammed against the door, then bullets plowed through the metal. I pulled the glass door shut to put one more layer of protection between us, and focused on getting down. I picked up the suitcase with bedding and dropped it flat. It slammed down and turned sideways. I grabbed the bag with food in it and tried to aim for the first case. It landed on top and bounced away. Over the edge. I climbed over and hooked my arm through the bars. Bem went first, the boy watching our backs with his hunting rifle aimed at the door. I grabbed her by the wrist as she gripped mine and squatted as low as I could. Her feet scrambled for the railing on the balcony below. She was too short to reach. I slid further down, my shoulder screaming, the hook of my elbow straining against the bar as it dug into muscle and flesh. Her feet caught and she fought for balance. She let go of my wrist with one hand, grabbed the column, and then leaped with a grace I'll never have onto the concrete balcony. Made it, she said. I pulled myself up again and took a deep breath. Your turn. I did the same with the boy, but didn't have to lower as far with him. He was heavier, the strain worse but a shorter duration. As soon as his feet hit the balcony floor, I scooted to the column and gripped it with the edge of my boots. I couldn't wrap my arms around it, but scooted down until I hit the rail. Then I stayed on the outer edge, and we repeated it again. Lowered Bem. She had to drop 4 feet to the patio. Lowered the boy. He dropped too. I got ready to lower myself when a Z crashed through the glass door and ran straight at me. I dropped the 10 feet to the ground below and fell backwards in a roll, trying to tuck, trying to spread out the impact. The Z hit the rail of the second-floor balcony and pitched over after me. It plopped into the sod beside me and slavered as it crawled my way. The boy kicked it in the head and knocked it away from us, long enough for him to swing his rifle around and shoot it. The noise would tell the gang we were out of the apartment. Go, I gasped as I stood up. Ankle hurt. Back hurt. Feet hurt. I grabbed the suitcases, and we hustled across the street as the kids carried their bags. We heard screaming and shouting behind us, random shots firing, but they were bad aims or couldn't lead the target. Once we put mansions between us, they stopped shooting. But they were coming. Drop your gear, I called to the boy. Follow me. Bem stayed with the bags without being told. I pulled a pistol in each hand and set him on one side of a house, waiting to see if they ran in the yard between, and I took the other. They chose mine. I heard them grunting as they ran into the narrow space, blocked on both sides by brick walls. I leaned around the edge of the house, trying to keep most of my body hidden, aimed and shot. There were 6 of them. The last 2 shot back and then they died too. Anything. Clear, Dad. I switched guns in my hands. Keep watching. Then I hopped down and put my back against the wall as I edged up to see if there were any others. The space smelled of blood and piss now that the boys were dead. I reached the end, but the road was clear. A shadow darted across the end of the house, racing for the boy, gun extended. I sprinted back and spun around the edge just as the boy leaped off the porch toward the trail, running at Bem. The side of his head erupted, and the body skidded to a stop. He had been so intent on his target, he missed the boy hiding in the alleyway. We were clear now on all sides. "Help me," I told him as he stared at the twitching body lying in the grass next to the trail. She warned me. "Come here." He walked toward me, a numb look on his face, the color gone from his cheeks again. "I went to school with him," he muttered. "He knew me. Let's get these guns." I put him to work taking the pistols from the dead bodies and checking for extra ammunition. He filled his pockets with weapons and passed me the extras, then we rejoined his sister. She stared at the dead body too, tears dripping down her face. "You knew him too?" She nodded. "He stayed at our camp a couple of nights." "Was he going to hurt you?" She shrugged her tiny shoulders, then nodded. "I think he meant to. He was at the tower too." I put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then it was clean. You saved your sister." "I guess so." He took 2 steps to the side of the trail, leaned over, and gave up lunch in 2 great heaves. I patted the small of his back until he was done. Then we gathered the bags, our new guns, and went hunting for a boat. 3. Chapter 3. The choices were simple. The pontoon boat or the other pontoon boat. I pointed to the smaller one. "That one first." "There's more room in that one, Dad." The boy pointed to the one that was in fact bigger by almost a half. "Did that bullet mess up your eyes?" The tears were gone, replaced by being silly. "He learned that from me." "Dad's got his reasons," I explained. It is the teenage prerogative to question every word that comes from a parent's mouth from the age of 13 up until around 23 or so. That decade should be called the terrible teens, and I was glad to see that even a zombie reboot of the world didn't change some things. They looked at each other before boarding the boat. That look that said, "Just indulge him." That look that reminded me over and over that the 2 of them were forever bound by growing up with each other, with their mother and stepdad, with me mostly absent. I was an outside in my own little family. They knew it. I knew it. And I knew that I could live with that feeling for the rest of my days so long as they were with me and safe. While they settled on the cushions and stowed the suitcases with gear, I poached gas from the other boat in the form of 2 red gas cans next to the outboard motor. "What if this won't start?" the boy asked as I limped them on board. "Then we get the big boat." It's not easy to hotwire an outboard motor, but after a couple of false starts, I got it going. We cast off, and I backed the boat out into the water, pointed the nose south, and we scooted along between the channel markers. We coasted under the bridges that linked Little Rock with its sister city across the water, watching the banks for Z and anyone who might take a shot at us. "Get down on the deck," I said as that thought crossed my mind. They did, and I ducked lower behind the console. No point in taking chances. But nothing bothered us. We saw Z on the shore in the city, and then we were south, where trees ran right up to the edge of the water. We passed the last bridge and the port of Little Rock, which claimed to be international, even though it was landlocked. Then it was fields and woods and us. Sunshine filtered through the clouds in patches, the wind was cold, but it could have been any normal day, and it's a normal family out for a winter excursion. We reached the dam in less than an hour, and the lock was closed. "This is why the smaller boat," I told the boy. I beached the pontoon on the shore. We climbed out onto the grass-covered levee. I did a farmer's carry with the fuel in each hand, The kids each took one suitcase, and we rolled past the dam looking for the next marina or fishing hut. I knew the dam was just south of Redfield, leading toward Pine Bluff. The river twisted and turned in a series of loops. If we went searching for wheels, it might be a faster straight shot, but I wanted to take the Arkansas all the way to the Mississippi, then further south and cut across to Alabama. I figured it was safer than being anywhere near Memphis and a potential ambush. We had to go 3 miles before we hit a small marina. When I saw it, I remembered I knew it from my youth, which may explain why I was so confident to stick near the water. There was another pontoon, a 24-footer that we loaded up. The store next to the marina was untouched. "Let's check it out," I said, and pulled a pistol. Them pulled hers as well, and the boy readied the rifle. But the store was empty of people, but stocked with supplies one might need for a day of fishing. I let the kids raid the snack aisle, and I scrounged fishing gear. We carried 3 giant coolers of stuff back to the boat. I was just indulging them, because there was another dam 3 hours south, and one more after that before we hit the big river. We couldn't carry the coolers or all the snacks with us, but they could stuff themselves while we rode. They did, and I ate too. Cheese chips and colas. Peanut candy bars. They ate their fill and more, all of us with our bellies distended. I watched Bem instruct the boy on how to fill the side pockets of the suitcase with more snacks, and then she surprised me by pulling 2 backpacks out of a bag and filled them too. We were burdened with food and fuel and ready for a hike when we hit the next dam. But the lock was open, so we got to stay in that pontoon until we were all the way to the next. 4. Chapter 4. I left the gas cans on the beach pontoon when we reached the closed lock on the dam. It was more important to carry our food, and I was confident we could find another marina soon. We traded a pontoon for a base boat, and then later a base boat for a deck boat that ran out of gas after a half hour. The noise of the engine and the roar of the wind made it difficult to talk, and once it was gone, the rush of the water against the hull. Then we were near the Mississippi, and a marina on the edge of the confluence. I didn't ask about their mother. The absence of offering information made me think she was gone. I didn't ask about their stepdad for the same reason. If they were alive, they would have been at the house or the school. If they were out hunting, the kids would have asked to wait. But their silence told me part of the story. I'd let them come to the rest in their own time. It was easy to tell when we hit the Mississippi River. There was a sign on the riverbank that told barge pilots where they were. I think we could have figured it out on our own. The Arkansas River is a muddy brown color that drifts over into the black spectrum. The mighty Mississippi is the color of red clay and mud, and a couple million acres of sediment that washes down in 1,000 tributaries in a turbulent rush toward the Gulf of Mexico. The speed of the water increased, and we shifted out into the current heading south. Or mostly south, since the river swings back and forth on itself in long meandering curves. I saw an article once about a man who was floating the river in a canoe and watched the sunset in the east due to one of those twists. I tried to figure out how that happened, but we didn't have time to get twisted around. We weren't on the water an hour before I sighted a big island with a long sloping beach that was close enough to sunset for us to call it a night. We could look for another island, offered the boy, putting distance between us and Arkansas. He wanted away from the memories. "I don't want to be on the water after dark," I told him. He accepted that. They both did, and hopped over the front of the deck as soon as I beached it on the slack water side of the island. 20 yards away was Mississippi. We could climb up that 12-foot bank in the morning and start our way back to Alabama, and then points beyond. I was sure we would find a town or something where we could get transport. But that left too much to chance. I knew there were 2 cities we would pass, Natchez and Vicksburg. I just couldn't remember which one came first, and had no map, no internet to check my faulty memory. Better to stay on the water and come to the town by noon, grab a ride and work our way back to Fort Jasper. Besides, I didn't pick up the fishing gear for nothing. The boy stringed a pole and cast it, then propped it with a branch buried in the sand. He fixed 3 more lines and cast them as well, monitoring each with gentle tugs from practiced hands. He was a hunter and fisherman, his love of the outdoors coming from his stepfather. I had hated hunting, since it was the only way we had meat growing up. Fishing was the same for me, a chore, work not pleasure. I was proud of him though. Bem gathered driftwood from above the water line and built a fire with a lighter from her pocket. She piled enough wood to last the night, and when the boy cheered his first catch, she built a spit over the flames with a long stick. My children amazed me as I watched. I sat by the fire and checked our weapons, getting a count of bullets and pistols, combining magazines, consolidating and putting the empty weapons into a pack. Then I moved to the rifle, double-checked the load. We only had 4 shots left. I handed Bem her gun back. "Eyes up," I told her. "I'm going to do a walkabout to make sure we're safe." I moved up a small bluff into the tree lines and stopped to see what I could hear. Just the wind in the trees, the water as it slurped at the banks of the islands and on the shore closest to us. The island was large, a half-mile in length and 3/4 of that wide. At one point, it may even have been connected to the mainland, but erosion and flooding had carved a channel through the land and ate away the dirt until it was separate. There were animals, though. Deer, rabbits, birds, and pathways that had to have belonged to wild hogs. No people. Better than that, no Z. I wished we had a tent, but the suitcase full of blankets would have to do. I made the far end of the island and walked back along the riverside of the small brown sand beach. Nothing out of place or out of the ordinary. I stopped where I could see the camp and the kids were smiling, helping each other spit 6 fish over the small flames. My heart swelled into my throat and I fought back a sob, but only barely. I found them. Lucky to be sure. Maybe even some divine providence. I had 1 more to go. 1 more night on the river, then back to a car or truck, and this time we'd move across the south at speed. I knew there were clear roads between here and there. I couldn't wait weeks to find her. I didn't know how long luck would hold out. The boy held up the pistol until he saw it was me, then scooted over on a log so I could sit between them facing the water. "I left the lines out so we can catch breakfast." Good man. It may not have been the best fish I've ever eaten in my life, but it was one of the most satisfying meals ever. We nestled together shoulder to shoulder as we ate, and then in silence as we watched the fire. I felt satisfied. I hope they did too. 5. Chapter 5. "Wake up," I whispered in Bem's ear and shook her shoulder. She shot up into a crouch, ready to run. I shook the boy and repeated it. The fire had burned down to embers, but I could see our mistake now. It was the only light in a river of darkness. Anyone on the shore could see it, anyone on the water too. Apparently they had. I put a finger to my nose to tell the kids to be quiet. We could hear the splashing of paddles rowing. There was not time for our eyes to adjust though. The sounds meant they were close. I grabbed the rifle in one hand and a sleeve in the other. "Stay close," I said softly and hustled up to the bluff. Bem grabbed her brother and dragged him along with her. We made it to the tree line and up into the brush. I pulled them behind a tree. "Move 10 yards in and lay down. Don't let me pass you." I didn't want them out of my sight, but it was so dark I couldn't see them anyway. But I needed to see who or what was coming to shore. The kids moved behind me, and then I didn't hear them as they hid. I turned back to the bluff and sighted down the end of the rifle, waiting for anything to move between the fire and my position. The sound of metal on rock cut over the noise of the river as their boat ground ashore. Then they muttered as they jumped out, strong southern accents from the Mississippi side of the water. "Told you we was making too much noise," said one. "They done run off." I watched shadows move in our camp below, but that's all I could make out. "How else we supposed to get here then?" said a second voice. "It ain't a big place, Travis. We could just go hunt them down." I zeroed in on that shadow. At least I think it was that one. It was hard to tell who was taking in the dark, and they were bending and scooping up our packs and suitcases. They left the sheets we tied up as lean-tos and the comforter ground cover, but as I watched, they filled their boat with our gear. "You can hunt if you want to," said the first one. "We got what we came for." He jumped into the boat along with a couple of others. After a moment, Travis jumped in with them. I heard the scrape of oars as they pushed off, and the steady beat in the water as they rowed away. I also heard our boat scrape off the rocks and watched the shadow of it drift after them. "Pirates," I thought, and began to take aim. But that might bring them back. Like the first one said, they got what they came for. I had the kids, we were safe, and we could go ashore to hunt for more supplies. I pushed off the ground and began walking slowly back toward the kids. "They're gone," I called out. Silence. They were good at hiding. I counted out the 10 yards, but didn't see them on the ground. A twig snapped to the left of me. "Boy," I whispered. Something arced out of the darkness and slammed into the side of my head. It sent me reeling. I bounced off a tree, my feet hit the edge of the bluff, and I slipped over the side as it swung back and missed. Someone was trying to beam me with a piece of driftwood. I hit the ground and rolled, trying to put space between me and whoever it was that was playing home run derby with my ear. I jumped up and searched the night. Where were the kids? I heard 2 bodies jump off the bluff and crunch in the sand on 2 sides of me. They were big, man-sized, not kids. More pirates, I guessed. "You think he's worth the trouble?" the one on the left drawled. I pulled a pistol and shot him, then swung to the man on the right. All I could make out was his shape against the bluff. "Hey, hey," he screamed. "Hold it." "Where are my kids?" "On a boat on the other side." I took 2 steps closer so I could see better. "Don't shoot me. Please." I pulled the trigger and let him fall. Other side. I had to reach the other side. Over the bluff and through the woods. Anyone with the kids would have heard the shots. I took off running around the beach, past our campsite, and up the far side where the mud-colored water slowed and eddied against the Mississippi shore. 100 yards away, a small boat pulled away from shore. I couldn't make out individuals, but there were 5 shapes I could see. Would they put the kids in the bottom? Or hide behind them? I raced faster, feet slurping in the mud as the current caught them. 2 of them pulled on oars, gaining distance. I've never been a sprinter. Long-distance running is about staying power. But thousands of hours running over the past decade trained the muscles, and I dug deep. The boat was churning parallel to shore. I pounded across the beach, catching up. One of the shadows turned, and a flash of fire bloomed from his hand. The bullet zipped over my head. I stopped, planted my feet, and held my breath as I aimed. I squeezed the trigger, and the shape threw up its arms and pitched over the side of the boat. That set it to rocking, and the 2 shadows with oars mumbled shouts. I ran harder. The boat was 50 feet offshore, and twirling in the current as it floated downriver. The 2 shadows seemed to argue, but neither set oar in the water to correct their course or pull further away. Could they be the kids? I passed the boat and kept running, working to get ahead of it. I shed my coat, my shirt, stopped, slipped off my boots, and hit the water in a shallow dive. I slapped through the water on an intercept course for the boat, hoping the current would carry it to me. The other 2 shadows in the boat began shooting at the shore where I once was, but not into the water. I treaded water, felt the river tug on my legs in a swirl as the shallow wall boat floated right to me. The men inside were focused on the island. I grabbed the gunwale and yanked myself over into a tumble of river water and squirming bodies in the bottom of the boat. I kicked 1 shadow over the side, took an oar whack against my shoulder, and grabbed a second man by the shirt and launched him over with my foot. There were 2 left in either end of the boat, and 2 still bodies in the bottom. The boy and Bem, hands tied, mouths gagged, frozen in wide-eyed fear. They didn't recognize the wet monster that rolled out of the river and on top of them. I grabbed a fallen oar and speared it into the closest shadow. He tried to get his gun up and shoot. The bullet plowed through his partner and sent him into the water with a gurgle-filled curse. The oar knocked his gun up, and I hopped up on a metal seat and did my best extra-point kicker impression, going for a Super Bowl win. My toe connected with his chin, cracked his head backwards. The pistol dropped into the bottom of the boat, and I slammed into the limp man before he collapsed and tipped him over the edge. Then we were past the island and in the dark river, the boat spinning about in the current. The dark on the water seemed heavier, the black banks rolling by like undulating shadows. I crawled to the kids and lifted them up. The boy fought back, still unable to see more than a shadow clawing at him. "Boy," I grunted, and he went still. "Bem." I untied them, and they grabbed each other. Not me. Maybe that would come later, I reasoned. I felt around for something in the boat, anything to steer with, to try and control our ride. I found a short oar and took it to the back of the craft, shoved it in the water to act as a rudder. "Are you hurt?" "Scrapes and bruises," said Bem. We tried to fight back. She broke down crying then, tiny shoulders heaving. I could see the shadows merge as her brother held her. Then I was crying too. I came too close to losing them again. This world, I swallowed the lump in my throat. This ever-loving bloody world. I was going to find T and get Anna and take my family away from it all. Away from militia and mad generals, and away from cults and rednecks and river pirates. The survivors were worse than the Z. I felt the rage bubble and boil, the anger swelling up in a surge that threatened to take me into the red. I fought it down by breathing. In 4 counts, hold for 3, out 4 counts, hold for 3. It helped. My racing heart slowed a little. The tide receded on the rage, and I could feel the tunnel vision open up. I breathed some more. Did they bring guns? I tried to find a task we could do in the dark, some action to take their mind off what almost happened. I needed an action too, but holding the oar was working for now. My kids had seen more people die at my hand. Maybe they didn't me to hug them because they thought I was a monster. I heard the clatter of fingers on metal as they searched. "Empty," said the boy, referring to the boat. I fished in the water in the stern and pulled out the soaked pistol the last man had dropped before going over into the water. I would have to dry it and clean it later, once the sun came up. "No food," Bem called out. I watched them huddle together for warmth as the wind picked up on the water. My wet clothes soon got cold and stiff, my body started shivering. I remembered reading a piece about a man who got out of his Jeep in a snowstorm and froze to death. I tried to recall the details of hypothermia, but I knew the core temperature only had to drop a couple of degrees before it was a problem. Often during a long-distance race, back when I ran 100-milers, I could start shivering at anything below 80 degrees. Air temp, not my core. I knew I shouldn't have started thinking about it because my muscles responded by contracting, cramping and twitching in spasms, shivers that rocked my whole body. "You okay, Dad?" Bem asked. She couldn't see me, unless my shadow was moving like a backlit marionette. "Fine," I chattered. "You want my coat?" "No, boy. Keep it. We need to get off the water." It was good advice. I should have thought of it. The article also said brain function decreases the colder you get. I didn't have much to start with, so if I got much colder, we were in trouble. "Distance," I told them. "More distance between us." "Stay here," the boy told Bem, and worked his way back to me across the 18-foot expanse of the metal boat. "You need to get off the metal," he told me. "The cold is leaching." Leeches in river water. Could I feel them on my skin? I swatted at my legs and held the oar in a death grip in the other hand. The boy sat next to me. "The boat doesn't have anything in it but us." I guess those guys didn't plan on taking us far. That reached me, sent off pings of worry in the base of my brain. Just how far were they planning to take the kids? I worked the kinks in my neck and forced the muscles to move so I could see the eastern shore. It was far enough away that I didn't worry. We should stop and build a fire, the boy argued. We're all wet and cold. I wished we could. But a fire is what drew them to us. And they would be looking. I couldn't remember how many were dead, 1 or 2 on the island, a couple of more in the river, maybe a drowning also. If they were a tight-knit group, they would come after the boat. I couldn't recall if pirates were bound by honor, but it didn't matter. We weren't stopping until after daylight. Sunrise, I told him. He looked at his wrist and sighed. I wore a watch back when it mattered. I never did, I told him. I remember. But you were always on time. Use my phone. Want me to steer for a while? I tried to shake my head, and it devolved into a shivering spasm. Rest, I chattered. Sleep if you can. I won't. I can't. He crawled to the stern and huddled with his sister for warmth. I stuck the handle of the short oar between my arm and torso and curled my arms around me. Cold again. This time, though, no lucky fish camp to crawl into, no saltines and soup. Just river water and waiting for daylight. 6. Chapter 6. I don't remember passing out. I don't remember waking up until I was being carried on a stretcher. I opened my eyes and stared at the sky, blue with white cloud puffs rolling overhead. Then into a building. I could feel the wheels jump over a door jamb, felt the rocking of the stretcher, and tried to sit up. Hold him, said a man's voice. Soft, firm, and gentle hands pushed me back onto the foam mattress. White straps were tied to my wrists and held me to the metal of the stretcher. I looked around for the kids, stomach roiling. They were walking with the stretcher, Bem's arm over the boy, holding him tight as they followed. She smiled. Not scared. Not panicked. Just a tiny smile that eased the clenching sensation in my gut. If they weren't scared, we might be okay. You can take the restraints, I said. I'll lie still. What did he say? A female voice this time. It will take a few hours for his voice to come back, said the male voice again. He leaned over me. Green scrubs. Stethoscope. You're in our clinic, he explained. You're going to be okay. I felt pressure on my shins. Can you feel that? I nodded. If they couldn't understand me, I wasn't going to waste my breath. Feet or leg? Can you feel your feet, Dad? The boy was by the bottom of the stretcher. I looked at him, then down at where my feet were. White, shriveled, waxy-looking flesh under the dark skin of the doctor, touching them with long fingers. I couldn't feel it. No. Sounds like a no, said the woman. I saw her then on the other side, wearing a similar outfit to the man. You have hypothermia, he explained. I guessed that one. Wet clothes on a windy night on the river. Soup, I grunted. Yes, he nodded. Soup and liquids. You should get feeling back in a few hours. Where? You shouldn't try to talk, said the woman. Let the doctor take care of you. Vicksburg, Dad, said Bem. We're safe. She smiled, another tight little smile. Safe. I wouldn't be sure until I could check it out myself. But that would have to wait until I could walk. Maybe my voice would come back before then. 7. Chapter 7. I woke up in an empty room and didn't like it. My memory of hospital rooms before the zombie plague was full of beeps and whooshing noises, the sound of people bustling as they rushed about to save lives. Here there was nothing. I wondered if there was a map on the door saying, "Here there be silence." It opened, and there was indeed a sign saying, "Quiet, please." Close enough. You're awake, a fresh-faced boy said. He had eyes that matched his green scrubs and looked too young to be a doctor. I'm Zach, he introduced himself. Don't get up. I couldn't if I wanted to. My legs and wrists were strapped to the bed. That's a joke, he explained as he untied my right hand. I snatched the green scrub and yanked him close. Where are my kids? It seemed like a perfectly reasonable question. I'd just crossed half the country to find them, killed a couple hundred zombies, a couple dozen more humans, maybe more because who was keeping count? Just that past night, at least I think that's when it was, I fought off river pirates to save them and spent half the night frozen to the bottom of a boat to keep them safe. Now, I didn't know where we were. More importantly, I didn't know where they were. I knew they were not in the room. And now I was free. Zach responded, as many brave men before him had when faced with a dangerous situation. He piddled. I watched the stains spread across the front of his green scrubs, his leg growing darker, his face glowing scarlet. But I didn't let go. Zach might be trying to play a trick on me. I did look at him closer, though. Zach had zits. Acne, like a teenager, and then I realized he was one. Another trick. Send in a kid to soften me up, because good guys don't hurt kids. Untie my other hand, I told him. He fumbled the strap loose. Your legs too, he stuttered. Sir. The sir made me let go of his shirt. And the kids walked in the room, with another nurse carrying a tray of food. Dad, asked Bem. Dad, chastised the boy. What happened? The nurse set down the tray and untied my other leg. He woke up confused, Zach explained. Give credit to the kid, he was being pretty cool about getting scared pissless. Made me respect him. Sorry, I offered. It's okay, he said. I'm going to go change now. The last one, he said to Bem. She giggled. My daughter giggled at the pimply-faced boy who tied me to the bed. Technically, I knew that he untied me from the bed, but he was making eyes at my little girl. I should have killed him when I had the chance. She watched him leave. I did too, ready for his next trick. Eat, commanded the nurse. She pushed the tray closer on a table and lifted the bed up with a manual lever. I pushed off the side and sat up. I'm going to be okay, I told her. I just need clothes and we'll get out of your hair. You can't leave yet, she smirked with one side of her mouth, then caught my look. Sir, she added. I had to work on the glare, but maybe the scar was making me look a little meaner than I felt. Or maybe she got it right. Them and the boy weren't coming closer either. They stood together, close to the wall where they could watch the door and me at the same time. How long have we been here? 1 day, they answered together. Where is it? Vicksburg, said the nurse first. Eat. The doctor is going to be by in a few minutes. We'll get you clothes and get you released. Released was a hold back to before. A throwback to when hospitals could almost hold you hostage unless you knew about a little thing called against medical advice. Where did you stay last night? Here with you, the boy answered. What happened? Bem stepped forward then and put a hand on top of mine. We couldn't wake you up, she said. The sun came up, but we couldn't find a place to land the boat, and then we passed a city and they were yelling at us. Natchez, the nurse sniffed. Den of thieves and bandits. You were lucky to get past them. You wouldn't move, said Bem. You just huddled in the boat and shivered. We couldn't wake you up. I thought you had been shot, the boy added. You were just trying to hide it from us. The doctor stepped in. You haven't eaten, he looked at the tray. Small bowl of soup. Small sandwich cut in two. A plastic container of juice. Do you have an appetite? An appetite for answers. He smiled, white teeth standing out against his dark skin. That's good. You have your humor back. He's got humor. Sniped the boy. I picked up the sandwich, dipped it in the broth and took a bite. Excellent, said the doctor. He lifted a chart and examined it. As you can imagine, our resources are nowhere near where they were before. But it looks like you took a blow to the head, and that combined with hypothermia caused you to lose consciousness. A pirate tried to use my skull as a baseball. Sounds like them. You were lucky. They almost succeeded. He didn't. I am. He ran a finger along the scar line above my ear. This is poor stitching, he said, as he gave it a professional appraisal. But it worked. I asked her to make it a conversation piece. Finish eating. I dipped and chewed. Zach came back into the room with a pair of scrub tops and bottoms in his hands. He took the long route around the room to make sure he was close to Bem by the wall. Are those the ones you pissed in? I reminded him about his situation just a few moments ago. No, sir, he answered. These are fresh. Pretending to be respectful in front of the girl, trying to impress her. Punk. I can't do a CT scan, said the doctor. You don't seem to have internal bleeding. There's bruising and you'll have a headache, but if you can hold food down, you just need to take it easy for a few days. I scarfed the second sandwich and paused mid-chew. Did you eat? I said to the kids. Guilt washed up like nausea and threatened to make me vomit. I fed them, Zach piped up. He flashed a smile at Bem. She blushed and flashed one back. I stood up, and the sheet that was covering me fell away from my chest. I turned around to slip into the scrubs and heard the kids gasp. Maybe the nurse too. Dad. I was going to ask about your back, said the doctor. I felt his fingers on part of the skin, and then just pressure as he ran them over sections of damaged flesh. What made this? He touched. Whip. It's fresh. Less than a week old. Someone whipped you. The boy grunted. I started to turn around, but the doctor stopped me. This. Grenade. This. I couldn't remember, and told him so. It was a rough trip to get the kids, I explained. I ran across some bad people. I turned around then and slid into the scrub top. The look on my kids' faces broke my heart. The look on Zach's face made me grin. He shivered, and that made me grin more. I'm okay, I assured them. Sticks and stones. Jesus, Dad, Bem wiped tears from the corner of her eyes. What did they do to you? They tried to keep me from you. They whipped you, the boy was outraged. Shot you. Burned you. Yeah, but not all at the same time. I put my arms around them and pulled them close finally, and they reached around me. Tenderly at first, as if they were afraid of hurting me more, but then tighter as they felt my grip close over them. I could keep you here a week, but like I said, our resources are limited. I'm sure I'll see you around town and I'll check on you. I watched the doctor leave. He took the nurse with him, I guess to check on other patients. What did you find out about Vicksburg? I didn't want to let the kids go, but we still had a plan to make, and ground to cover. We were here with you. Zach offered to give us a tour, said Bem. I glared at him. You want to give me a tour, Zach? He gulped. Yes, sir. I let him lead us out of the room, and I promise it was only with a little bit of sadistic satisfaction when he kept looking back at me. 8. Chapter 8. Zach wasn't the worst tour guide a person could ask for. I would never tell him that, though. He led us out of the hospital, which was a converted school building. What was it with school buildings in the South, I wondered. I guess they were good multi-purpose buildings and close at hand. You didn't have to look far to find a school in almost any neighborhood. They usually had a big meeting space and lots of smaller rooms that could be used for different things. He led us down the street toward a strip mall of metal building storefronts. I couldn't recall if Vicksburg had a historic district, but if it did, this wasn't part of it. The roads were clear, lots of green space and prefab metal buildings slapped up in house stores. I thought Vicksburg had a lot of history, but there was no way to tell from this part of town. Zach walked a little too close to Bem. The boy noticed my glare and nudged my elbow. "Stop," he whispered, then snickered at my raised eyebrows as I gave him my best "Who-me?" "Look. I'm from Gulfport," he was telling us. "We got hit pretty hard. But I heard about this place, and when I got here, they let me in." "You don't let a lot of people in." I wanted to hear a lot more, since I had been unconscious when we arrived. The kids could fill me in on their version of the details later, but Zach knew the city, or at least pretended to know it. "Most that I know of," he said. "When they get to the gates, the guards interview them. I don't hear of too many that get turned away. You are the first people to come on the river, except for pirates from Natchez." "What did you do in Gulfport?" Bem asked. "Were you an EMT?" I thought my little girl was crushing, but saw a squint in her eye. She looked like Zach might try to trick us too. That made me wonder what happened while I was asleep. What did they overhear? What could they share? "Where's the marina?" I asked. "We didn't come in a marina," said the boy. "They've got a suspension bridge across the water." "What happened to the interstate bridge?" "It's still there. Blocked. I went to look at it once. The cars caught on fire and burned the metal. Now we can't use it." He pointed in the direction of the bridge. "There's the old bridge," I told him. I'm not sure why I said it. Maybe just to let old Zach know this dad wasn't falling for his charm. That this old dad knew a thing or two about his new hometown. I'd driven through here on several occasions since I was an adult, and over 24 times as a kid. I remembered the rusted red bridge just north of the interstate bridge, and wondered if it was a railway connection, or if it had been adopted into the trail system and turned pedestrian and bike path. Zach didn't need to know any of that. He licked his lips and smiled. "It's still there. But we don't go over it. Both of the bridges are outside the wall." "The had a wall." "Keep talking, Zach." "Where's the wall?" He turned up a side street and led us half a mile. I could see it before we got there, a giant metal plate shoved into the ground 12 feet high. Closer, we could see it was a series of metal plates welded together, the scars of metal bulging with thick iron poles set into the ground to support the great weight of the wall. Zach opened his mouth to speak. Opened his mouth to spill his guts and tell me everything we needed to know to get out of here. "Look," the boy shouted. We turned to look as a small plane buzzed over the river and floated down in a smooth landing somewhere we couldn't see. A plane. I couldn't keep the wonder from my voice. But it made sense. If cars worked, then so would planes. It's not like we had an EMP. What we lost were the people who knew how to fly them, unless zombies could find the friendly skies. Z weren't that friendly to begin with. Zach's smile got wider. "Cocky bastard. We have a couple of them that land over in the old military park." He pointed again. As if we could tell where it was by the direction of his finger. "Is that in the wall?" "Yeah," he nodded. "We can go see it if you like." It was my turn to nod. I liked. I didn't know how to fly a plane, but if we could borrow a pilot and one, we could make it back to Fort Jasper in an hour. Maybe less. I was going to ask him who was in charge of the airfield when we heard it. Bootsteps. Marching in sync and moving our way fast. A group of men in black rounded the corner. I reflexively pawed at my waist for a pistol, but there was nothing there. I grabbed the kids instead and pulled them behind me, blocking them with my body, and squared off while we waited. 9. Chapter 9. Someone had my idea. The cops, if they were cops, surrounded us in a crescent. The men were covered in riot gear. Arms and legs protected, faces hidden by thick plastic helmets. If they were dressed like that, I hoped Z weren't in the city walls that loomed around the community. We pressed back against the wall. Closer, I could see they were iron plates, like the sides of railway cars welded end to end and bolted to posts in the ground. It was cheap, strong, and effective, creating a 12-foot steel barrier of multicolored metal. Two crews working hard, one cutting, the other locking them in place, could put up a wall this big in a week or so. Whoever had the idea was smart. Smarter than me. I hoped to meet him. Then we watched a man in a white suit pull up in a golf cart. A silent electric golf cart. He rolled his bulky belly from under the steering wheel and fought gravity to make his feet where he tottered between two riot police waiting to catch him if he fell or jump out of the way. I was surprised. The zombie apocalypse was the best diet I'd ever been on in my life. I was down 40 pounds, maybe more. Each of the kids had dropped 15 pounds since I had last seen them. Everyone I knew was always on the verge of starvation since the Z came, hunting for food or running for their life. The people here looked normal. Zach looked well-fed. The doctor, the nurse, the cops now in front of us. None of them looked hungry. Normal, as in mostly larger than average, which was the norm in southern Louisiana. This man made them look svelte by comparison. His ruddy face was topped with stringy white hair that swept around and over a war, with a bald spot peeking under the strands. He mopped the humidity off his face with an immaculate handkerchief and stuffed it into the breast pocket of the pristine white suit. Warren Cotton, crew of Mardi Gras, he held out a fat hand. I reached to shake it, and two men jumped forward to wrap shackles around my wrist. "We've been expecting you," he said. 10. Chapter 10. Back before the world went dark, I was a manager in a mid-sized company. The title said director, which put me on the bottom rung of the C-suite. My bosses were all Army, and if you know what direction the crap slides in, you know the bottom step is one slick rung. One of my direct reports once asked me how I could stay so stoic, keep such a poker face when they could hear the yelling in the meetings, most of it directed at me. I would smile and quote something that I thought sounded wise at the time. "This too shall pass." I remember my dad told it to me once when I was sobbing in bed from a teenage broken heart. This too will be over. This won't last forever. Because the ups of corporate leadership were always followed by the downs, and they would come again. It's called a roller coaster for a reason. The best leaders learn how to even out their moods, and it was something I practiced daily. It's going to be over soon. That's how I survived running 100-mile races. It's how I trained to run a 200-mile race that I never got to try. Thank you, zombies. Or the CDC that made them. Running taught me to focus on the now, and know that no matter how I was feeling, it was going to pass. It prepared me for bonks, crashes, and runner highs. Same thing in the boardroom meetings. No matter how much they questioned, yelled, cajoled, and bitched, it was going to be over, and I could get back to the business of making them more money. This too will pass. I told myself. It was a mantra I chanted in time with the swinging of a cage. It was a giant dog crate, thick metal bars chained to the ceiling. A guard stood just at the end of the arc, and every couple of swings, he would kick the cage with his boot to keep it going. I didn't know why they caged me. "We've been expecting you," the man in white told me. Expecting what? Who's talking about little old me? Do you know why the caged bird sings? I asked the guard as the crate spun around and we made eye contact. Technically, the eye contact was mine. His face was hidden behind a face shield. I thought it was overkill wearing it inside, where there were no zombies, but my sense of fashion had been limited to jeans, layers of shirts, and thick jackets since they came to town. Besides, if he was dressed like that, maybe he expected the Z to come through the door. If they did, I wondered how long I could cling to the top of the cage before my arms gave out. I fell to the bottom and they could reach me through the wire. The door opened and I clenched up, ready to jump. The man in white stepped through. Warren Cotton, crew of Mardi Gras. He nodded to the guard who left the room. He shut the door behind him, and I relaxed a little. No Z yet. I wondered what the man in white had planned, though. His suit was immaculate, but he did not look like he had a secret recipe with 26 spices. "You don't look comfortable," he said. I was just glad the spinning was stopping. Where are the kids? The kids, he noticed. Not my kids. Not my children. Bastard. I gripped the bars and flexed, testing the metal. It was a dog crate, it couldn't be that strong. There are 3 guards right outside the door, he drawled. I've ordered them to shoot you if you do something foolish. I hope that won't be necessary. That depends, Warren. The bars made a creaking noise as I pulled harder. Did you order them to shoot me if I don't act foolish? We locked eyes for a moment, and I suspected he was taking a measure of me. Your children are fine, he said. They're finishing the tour. No way to check. I had to take his word for it. But it was an olive branch. I released the bars, and he seemed to relax too. I have heard rumors of you. I can't say the same. One man destroying entire communities just to find his children. When you say it like that, it sounds bad. Now here you are. Cotton shoved the bottom of the cage with the tip of his gleaming cowboy boot. It swung back and forth over the concrete floor, rotating in a slow circle that made balancing on the thin crossbar tough. The muscles in my thighs were on fire. Whatever will we do with you? Cotton drawled. I gripped the pipes of the cage as the room spun around me. The fat man in the white suit twirled into view and out. Are you here to destroy my home? He shoved out a boot and stopped the spinning. Isn't crew a plural? It is. And I am. A self-declared crew of one. This is my crew of many. My crew. See the difference? I shook my head. One is a K, one is a C crew versus crew. It's the same thing, I wanted to say. A kid in kindergarten would make the spelling mistake. But he was from New Orleans. I knew people in NOLA, and they loved the crew, a Mardi Gras tradition. There were kings and queens, bells and bows, and more trombones than anyone would ever see outside of an orchestra or high school band. The crew watched my face. His cheeky jowls quivered as he chuckled. You'll spend too much time trying to figure it out, so just let me clue you in on it. I am the HMFIC around here. Do you know what that means? I did. Then we won't have any problems. If you need to think of it a different way, this is a kingdom, and I am the absolute ruler. I got it. Then we won't have a problem, will we? Why are you here? Part of me wanted to say, because I passed out on the river, and my panicked kids pulled into your port. Another part wanted to say, because I want my kids to be safe. But he thought I came to destroy his world, which had my brain spinning like the cage I was suspended in. He paced in the opposite direction of the twirl. I've worked very hard to build up these walls, to keep the riff-raff out, as it were. The undead, the people who would destroy our world. Those who relish in the misfortune of others. I'm not any of those, I pointed out. He chuckled. A chuckle was good. It meant we were finding common ground. That's what they teach you in any speech class. Get the audience laughing with you, and you win them over. No, he grabbed a bar and stopped the cage. Warren put his face close to the bar, within my reach if I chose to lunge. You are something else entirely. It was a test. I recognized it and stayed in the corner, legs trembling from being in a squat for so long, arms clenched against the metal. He nodded and smiled. You know, don't you? I wasn't sure what I knew, but I nodded anyway. Better to have the king of Mardi Gras give me credit than open my mouth and prove I was a fool. You passed the test. He let go of the bar, and the cage did a slow turn. Guards stepped through the closed door, one with a shotgun, not necessarily aimed at me, but in my general direction. The second marched to the cave and unlocked the door. He held it steady as I climbed out. Warren waited by the door. I think you will find I am a reasonable man, he drawled. I like to dine while I think. It aids the digestion. I'd like you to join me. He motioned to the door with an outswept hand. The guard with the shotgun stepped to one side and moved the weapon my way. Not at me, but a threat. What choice did I have? I'd be delighted, I said, and stood up straight. Mr. Mardi Gras might think me a monster, but in another life I had manners. He would learn that too. 11. Chapter 11. The crew was a history teacher. This is the new dark ages. He took a bottle of wine and poured another glass of the blood-red liquid. Do you know how people survived back then? Fiefdoms. They gathered around a common safe space and worked their little farms to pay tribute to a leader who protected them. Around here, people built little compounds at their deer camps or churches. One only needed to study history to see where we were going to end up. I invited them inside. There were zombies in history. I was shackled to the table, a chain running under the wood to limit the movements of my hands and to keep me low to the seat. The chains jangled as I reached across the tabletop for the goblet he set in front of me. Not recorded, no. Another sip flushed his cheeks. But then a plague like this wouldn't be. They would keep it from the historical record. Who are they? I wondered aloud. He ignored me and ripped the leg off a roast chicken, tore the meat from the bone with fat, thick fingers and sucked it through full lips. I saw the road we were on and knew it would take a strong man to steer us from that course. He tapped a greasy finger to his temple. Strong in mind, the finger shifted to the folds of flesh that strained the seams of his Oxford shirt. Not so much here. This world is more fit for the latter. My exact line of thinking as well. That's why I created my emissaries. He pointed to the men in riot gear, standing next to the walls of the banquet hall. I sent delegates to each of the camps, to every compound we could find, and I invited all here to live in safety and peace. It worked. Well, of course it worked. Building empires are what kings do. Destroying them is left to raiders and Vikings. The question I'm asking myself, both eyes drilled into me. Which one are you? I leaned back in my seat and tried to spread my hands wide, but couldn't. The chains prevented it. Instead, I showed him my palms. I was just passing through. Hardly likely, he said. How many communities have you destroyed on your rampage across the South? 2. 3. It's not quite the Mongolian horde, but you are a barbarian at my gate. I'm inside the gate. His jolly cheeks spread into a slow smile. Yes. You are. Now what to do with you? Put me back outside, I told him. I have no problem with you. I have no problem with your people. Like I said, we were just passing through. I'm going to push down to New Orleans, grab a boat, and sail across the Gulf back to Florida. A pirate then, he lit up. You plan to raid the survivors along the coastline. I shook my head. I don't plan to raid anyone. I wondered what rumors of me he was talking about. No one knew me, certainly knew of me. It was true I had killed dozens of people, but I don't remember salting the earth. I've worked hard to build what we have here. We've planted crops. We've got a fish farm by the river. We have enough here that we're going to survive and rebuild. I think that's great, I said. I don't want to be a part of it. Like I said, you just show us the gate and we're out of your hair. He studied me then, for several long moments. The silence dragged on. The only sound was the tapping of his knife against the edge of his plate as he contemplated. I'm surprised at your response, he said. I expected something different. Most people don't want to leave, and I was told you would play a part. I didn't get the script. A smile cracked his visage. Yes, I suppose that would have helped. Perhaps we'll just meet the author of your role. He turned and motioned to the guard at the door. The man disappeared through it, returning a moment later and held it wide. I took a breath and waited. 12. Chapter 12. The general rolled through the door. Remember that scene in Empire where Han Solo and Princess Leia meet up with Lando in Cloud City, and he invites them to dinner? The doors open up, and Darth Vader is standing at the head of the table. It's then we learn just how fast Han Solo is on the draw. A real artist. Sure, we knew he was a badass when he shot Greedo in the cantina in the original film, but fast on the trigger too. It did the smuggler about as much good as it did me. I jumped back from the table, knocked the chair over, and pawed for my weapon. The shackle stopped me. And I didn't have a gun. He did. And laughed. I couldn't run, couldn't duck. The chains trapped me to the table, locked me in place. I thought about flipping it over, but that would be worse for me than just standing there. "Stop," said Warren. The general aimed his pistol at me. A shotgun racking is one of the scariest sounds on earth. Except when the shell being jacked into a chamber isn't for you. It stopped his gun. "Please," Warren added. The general slowly laid the pistol back in his lap and tried to kill me with a look. "Join us," said the king. He wheeled up to the table. A second guard I hadn't seen before stepped from behind me and set a plate on the table along with silverware. "I'm trying to decide why the stories don't match up," said Warren. "He arrived a few days ago with warnings of your rampage to come. Imagine my surprise when you showed up. No one was more surprised than me. With children, even. Not what I expected. Damn it." I hadn't stopped staring at the general since he rolled up to the side of the table. I saw his eyes shift when Warren talked about my kids. Leverage. I could see his wheels turning. Or revenge. If my hands had been free, I would have shoved a knife in the eye closest to me and dealt with the guards, preemptively keeping my kids safe. But the shackle stopped that. He smirked as the chains rattled. "One of my rules is no killing," Warren interrupted us. "As much as I like a good fight, and believe me, I know the role combat has played in the outcomes of history, I won't tolerate it within my walls." "He's a killer," the general sputtered. "He won't follow rules. I'll let you live if you walk away now." No one laughed. "Come on, that was funny," I told him. "Too soon." He slapped his hand into his lap, trying for the pistol. I used the chain to lift the table, slipped it over the bars of his wheelchair, and pinned his arms underneath. It wouldn't hold him forever, but it bought time. Time enough for the guard with the shotgun to step up and place the barrel against the back of his neck. Warren watched. He had set this up, I could see, to gauge our reactions. He was pretending at something, but I couldn't figure out what. The king reached forward and lifted his glass of wine to his lips. "Even chained, he's formidable." "I told you." "You told me many things. I am trying to determine which ones to believe." "I didn't lie," the general snapped. "He killed my men. He put me in this wheelchair. If you let him go, he'll destroy this place and everything you've done here to keep your people safe. He's told me he will leave. I just have to show him the gate." The general nodded. "My men and I can escort him out." "That won't be necessary," said Warren. "Not yet." He turned to the guard. "Take the general to his home." The guard grabbed the back of his wheelchair and scraped the bars on the underside of the table as he shifted it loose. The general sputtered and cursed as he was wheeled from the room, but it was cut off as the guard pulled the door closed behind him. "But what should I do with you?" I rattled the chains. "Let me go. Give me a head start. He's going to come after me, and he's going to try to hurt my kids. I can't let that happen. No one will hurt anyone inside these walls." "You don't know that. You can't protect them." I rattled the chains again. "Let me go, and you'll never see us again." The problem with the people in this new world is they still believe in democracy. Democracy didn't work. It got us to where we are in this current state. You need to understand something. This is not a democracy. This is a monarchy. You don't tell me what to do. I decide. I take in the facts and I decide. "I'm not telling you," I said. "I'm begging you." He sat back in his chair and drank wine. I could feel the clock ticking. I didn't know where the general's home was, But once there, he could dispatch his men to find my kids. The walled compound wasn't that big. It wouldn't take long. I shook the chains again. "That's a waste of your energy," said Warren. "You're not going anywhere until I decide." "Call the guard," I told him. "Why?" "The one behind me. Call him. You don't get to call the shots in here. I'm beginning to think the general was right about you." Time. I had to get free and find my kids. The general's men might find them before me. He might hurt them and try to cloud my mind, try for revenge. That couldn't happen. I grabbed the table with one hand and tilted it up on a leg. The plates and glasses slid off the side and smashed on the floor. Warren screamed, but I ignored him. I flipped the table over and spun around on my heels. The chain holding me down swung free and out in an arc. It cracked across the riot helmet of the guard as he rushed to stop me. Even with the protective gear, the speed of the chain sent him stumbling. I kicked for his most vulnerable part one could see, his chin where the helmet was strapped. Not hard enough to kill, but it knocked him out. I dropped to my knees, fumbled up the shotgun and twisted toward the king. He sat in his chair, mouth open. "Keys?" "Other guard," he waved at the door. "For just such an occasion." "Then you're good at planning ahead." He nodded. "I am." "Then what's your plan to get me out of here?" 13. Chapter 13. Then what? Warren asked and waited. He was calm under pressure after the first scream. I wouldn't quite call him composed. He had a tick under his left eye, a muscle spasm from stress. The twitch made him look vulnerable, so despite the face he put on, the stoic look he adopted to mask his fear, he was afraid of something. Of me. "Then I'm leaving," I told him. I tried to keep my voice level, even. To let him know I wasn't planning on killing anyone. That I just wanted to get out beyond the gates and take my kids and disappear. I can allow that. It was tough not to admire him. I had a gun. I had the upper hand. He had heard whatever stories the general made up about me to turn me into a roving boogeyman, and he still acted like a man in charge. "Head man in charge," I snickered. "The M stands for something else." "I know. I was trying to be polite for our dinner conversation." That made him smile, a real smile, or he was damn good at pretending. "I hate that we wasted almost a whole chicken." This time the hand waved at the floor. "You can strip the meat and make a soup. It hasn't been on the floor that long. And if you weren't behind these walls, you might eat worse." I hadn't yet, but once we were done with the canned food, I suspected we might go to dog food or cat food in cans. If we were hungry enough, we could pretend it was paid. "I'll have my men escort you to the gate." I sighed. "No dice, Warren. What we have here is considered an impasse. A catch-22, if you will. I don't trust you." He leaned back in his chair and put his pudgy fingers on the tip of his nose in a steeple. I'd read an article about leadership that said people did that to look smart. It was a way for con men to convince people that they were really listening. I indulged him. "You could decide to have your men jump me." I rattled my wrists. "I'm still chained." "I'll have them escort your children first, so you know they're free. I'll have them radio us." Was he really trying? Or buying time? Again, "You could have one of your men press a gun to my son's head and tell him to say something that wasn't true just to get me out there." He pursed his lips, crinkled his brow. "You say you want to leave, and I offer you safe passage, but you're refusing. Maybe you need to earn my trust." He sat up in his chair then. "The man behind you is coming too. He has plastic cuffs on his belt. You should bind his hands." I listened. There was a shuffling noise at my back, a low groaning series of grunts. I kept one eye on Warren and did as he suggested. The zip ties were in his belt, just as the man said. "I have you," I told him. "You have my kids. But you just earned some points, Warren. Get the other guard in here with the key and we'll take the next step. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a yellow walkie-talkie. Did you get that? We're coming through, a voice sounded from the other end. I aimed the shotgun at the door and took a step toward the table. More than one and you go first, I said out of the side of my mouth. Just one, Warren advised. With the key. We both watched the door creak open and a single hand push through the slit. It held a simple keyring with one tiny key on it. The guard finished stepping through and shut the door behind him. They were doing what Warren asked, and better yet, they weren't trying to get him killed or kill me. That extra step told me something about the way he ran his little walled community. He was careful. His people found him valuable. The guard took a couple of steps toward me, slow and tentative. I held up my left wrist to be unbound, then switched hands. The chain jangled to the floor and the guard stepped back. Step 1, I said to Warren. What's step 2? I stared at him then, let the rage bubble up inside my gut, let it reach my face. I had it in control, held in check, but I wanted him to see. Then I jacked the shotgun to eject 3 shells onto the floor and held it out to the guard. Step 2 is you walk me to the gate. The guard snatched the weapon from me. Warren smiled. 14. Chapter 14. We'll stop by the hospital to pick up your children. He drove the golf cart. I sat in the passenger seat as his emissaries jogged behind us. It would be tough in riot gear, so they must have been rough men or trained since the end of the world. Either way, I was impressed. Hospital. I tried not to growl. He heard it. They're not hurt. I instructed Zach to take them back there. We drove through simple streets lined with older homes built in the boom after World War II, abandoned to white flight, reclaimed through gentrification, and now being used again with an influx of refugees. There were no yards to speak of. The spaces between houses held mobile homes, single wide shoved in the narrow alleyways. The fronts were given over to garden space, though not much crop had shown yet. Just raised planter beds filled with black soil and stakes in preparation for something in the spring. He saw me watching. The grasshopper and the ants. I know the story. We have taken most of what we can find in the surrounding communities. The Natchez pirates have taken the rest. I don't plan on fighting them for the scraps left over, so we will grow our own instead. What if they come take it? They can try. I got a glimpse then of the man under the folds of fat, the man who others followed. There was iron there. That's why you let in the general. It wasn't a statement. His numbers and training will add to our own and make us a formidable foe. He pulled the cart up to the school building that doubled as a hospital space. Your children are inside, but I would like to show you something first. I followed him through the door as his men spread around the opening in attempts at being casual observers. I noted they were facing out, small clumps gathered on either side of the walkway to the building. It gave them 4 positions to monitor the street and create intersecting lines of fire if needed. I wondered why, but didn't ask. 15. Chapter 15. I stayed 2 steps behind Warren as he led me to what was once the school office. It was typical of a lot of offices I remembered, though I hadn't been in one since high school. Never visited my children's school office except to pick them up on the occasions where my plane arrived early, or one time with my youngest to buy tickets for a daddy-daughter dance. There were 3 rooms off the common area, each marked. One said principal, the other counselor, and the third marked storage. 4 men sat in the common room around a cafeteria table, playing a game of Uno. They stood to attention when Warren knocked lightly and opened the door. Gentlemen, he beamed. Please don't let me interrupt. They sat back at the table and resumed their game. I glanced through the open door into the principal's office and saw 3 sets of bunk beds against each wall, and tiny hints of living. Postcards or pictures taped to the walls over the beds, a couple of shirts folded on one. Warren opened the door marked counselor. There was a ham radio on a desk, manned by a fifth man under a headset. He smiled at Warren and doffed the headgear. "Sir, what's new today?" Warren inquired. There was a giant map of the United States on the wall, red and yellow pushpins marked dots on the spaces. "We connected with Japan last night," the radio operator gushed. "What did we learn?" "They have it too. Got hit pretty bad." Warren turned to me to explain. "We've connected with Paris, the Caribbean, and now Japan," he explained. "There are more of us who survived than most realize." I stepped past him and stared at the map. Red pins were shoved into Orlando, Miami, Atlanta, D.C. They made a glossy tip trail through every major population center. I could guess what the red stood for. "We haven't contacted any survivors there yet," he said from my shoulder. "What do the yellow mean?" "Albert. Yellow means a refugee center." My stomach dropped and my eyes moved over to Jacksonville, Florida. Red pin. Up the coast. Yellow at Savannah. Wilmington. Charlottesville. "How do you know this?" "I was in the National Guard," said Albert. "All of the radiomen." He pointed with his chin to the room full of what I knew were soldiers. This was a post. "We were called up to Jackson, but we never made it. Or the dead made it before us." Jackson had a red pin in the center. Gulfport. I let my eyes move over the map. There was a lot of red. Birmingham. Mobile. Destin. "Are these confirmed?" Albert shrugged. "Did we have eyes on them?" "No. But you see the world out there. If it's like Jackson, then yeah, it's confirmed." Orlando too. It was easy to assume the rest. "Can I get a copy of this?" "The map?" "I want the refugee centers." "Why?" "They were overrun too." "I don't have a poker face, I have a stoic's face. I know I look angry all the time. My kids even made fun of it. When Albert told me we lost the refugee centers, I needed a poker face. I needed to keep the emotion off it. I failed." Warren stepped back, and even Albert scooted his chair back. Then the crew of Mardi Gras put his hand on my shoulder. "Did you know someone in them?" It was a simple act. So small, just a touch from a man I didn't know. He was giving me strength, offering me a stranger support. More than a stranger, a man who had just held him at gunpoint. This was the man that people would follow. I'd have to tell Brian about him. I nodded. Albert didn't relax, didn't move back to his position. "Tell us about Japan," Warren asked. Albert swallowed hard and looked at a set of scribbled notes on a pad. A logbook. "It wasn't my shift, but looks like we lost Tokyo. Most of the survivors are in the north and south. They got radio communications back faster than we did, and are coordinating a cleanup. They're working together." He swallowed hard again. "It's not like here." I leaned against the wall. I didn't give a crap about Tokyo. I wanted to know about the refugee camps. "Which ones?" "One what?" "Which ones were overrun?" "It can't be all of them." "We don't know," the radio man explained. He pointed to the green pins. "Vicksburg. Natchez. Knoxville. Hannibal. Those are confirmed through radio contact and eyes on," he said. "Yellow means we've heard rumors." "White?" There were 24 or more white pins scattered across the U.S. "Radio contact, no information." "What about the government?" "Army." Albert shook his head. "Nothing. We're all gone." I growled. They didn't back up this time, but I could feel the mood in the room behind me shift. A subtle sound of bodies moving, tension in the air. "Nothing," Albert answered. "No contact." I took a breath in through my nose, let it out through my mouth, and watched Warren relax. I leaned forward and sorted through the pins for one with a green head. Then I found Jasper on the map and stuck it in. We're there, I said. 20 or so. That's not so many, said Warren. Soon to be 23. He smiled at me then. It touched his eyes. I tried to smile back and he removed his hand. I hadn't realized it was still there, still connecting me to being calm like an anchor. I felt a bubble in my stomach as the rage churned, but it remained low. I knew where to start looking. That was something. 16. Chapter 16. When you return to your camp, will you tell them about this place? Warren escorted me down the hall. I won't hide it from them. When you raid the coastal cities like a Viking, will you tell them? I could hear the grin in his voice. I'll spray paint it on every billboard if you like. I would not, he said. But if you run into good people, we can support them. He stopped at the door to a room. So long as they like catfish and bream. His fingers turned the knob and pushed through. The boy stood over Zach, holding a bloody chair leg. Bem cowered in the corner, her shirt ripped. Dad, the boy sobbed. Blood spattered his face and arm, sprays and splatters on the wall like a Jackson Pollock painting. He dropped the wooden piece, and it clattered on the floor. What did you do? Warren shouted, and ran across the floor to the body. Zach was gone. Or most of his head was. Guard! Warren screamed. I slammed the door shut and sprinted to him. We slammed together, and even though he had me by at least 100 pounds, I moved him against the wall, my hand across his thick lips. No, I whispered. No, no, no. His wide eyes watched over me, the wind from his nose blowing tiny flecks of snot and spit across my calloused hand. We find out what happened first. Warren shook his head. Laws, he said through my hand. Rules and laws. I heard pounding up the hallway, boots from the radioman and guards from outside. He tried, the boy started to say. Tears slid out of Warren's eyes and dripped across my hand. The door shattered open and his emissaries spilled through, shotguns held up. I backed away from Warren, grabbed the boy by the sleeve and dragged him with me toward Bem. Torn shirt, tear streak, bruised cheek. I felt the bubble burst and put them both behind me. 8 guards plus Warren. He wouldn't fight. They had guns. I was 5 feet from the chair leg. We didn't stand a chance. They would shoot the kids and I'd see it. Or they would shoot me and the kids would see it. Either way, I needed time. I needed a distraction. He tried to hurt her, the boy gasped behind me. Tell them. You heard him, I shouted at the guards. He tried to hurt my daughter. Warren pushed off the wall and adjusted his jacket. I told you no killing. It was self-defense. You were almost out of here, he seemed sputtered. You almost made it. I did it, I turned to the guards. It was me. I killed him. I used my hands to hold the boy behind me as we straddled Bem. I tried to cover them both with my body, hide them. Do it, Warren sighed. The guards moved in and clubbed me with a gun. I tried to fight as they dragged the kids away, but fell into darkness instead. 17. Chapter 17. I never really passed out. I've been knocked out before, but this was different. It was like a version of tunnel vision, where the light expanded and collapsed in and out in a blurring tumble of confusion. I could hear voices, grunts and shouts, shrieks and yells. Down the hallway, past the radio room, past the golf cart as the emissaries dragged me along the street. I tried to get my feet under me, but they wouldn't work right. We reached an intersection, and there was the general in his chair, surrounded by his soldiers. Told you, he said. He wasn't talking to me. He winked at Warren, then gave me a sneer. I'd say, be seeing you, but I think I'm going to enjoy watching you instead. I wish I could say I thought of something glib, some flippant remark to let him know he couldn't get to me. Something like, stand up for yourself. Or take a hike. But while I thought those things in my head, I didn't say them out loud. I may have mumbled, if you don't think mumbling is too undignified. They frog walked me up a series of steps and into a box overlooking a football field. Warren stood beside me, a look of sadness darkening his brow, a burly man holding each of my arms. "I wish it wouldn't have come to this," he said. I could see below. It looked like a simple high school in a poor neighborhood. A track ran around a football field, stadiums of bleachers on two sides. All of it surrounded by a 10-foot chain-link fence. It looked reinforced. I watched emissaries lead the boy and Bem onto the field. One held him by the opening. The other dragged her to the middle of the 50-yard line and slammed her to the ground. "What's his name?" I blinked away some of the black and white. "The guard." I turned to the man on my left. "You got a radio?" He grunted. "You do have a radio. I can see it on your belt. You know that guy?" Grunt again. At least he was a consistent conversationalist. "I'm making you watch this," said Warren. "I don't want to do this, but there are laws that govern this society. Murder is met with extreme prejudice. Tell that guard I'm going to knock his head off for throwing her down." The grunter gave me a giggle. "Good luck with that." We were making progress. He was talking. It was monosyllabic. That was an evolutionary step in our communication. They closed the gate behind the boy. I could see his mouth screaming as he beat against the metal. Then below us, Z started lumbering onto the field. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I'm telling you why. It would have made them tense up. They would have gripped tighter. "We don't do the justice ourselves," said Warren. "But justice is served." He fooled me. Son of a bitch. The boy ran toward the group of Z, waving his arm and getting their attention to keep it off Bem. The herd turned toward him, and he led them around the track, a slow jog. Bem waited until the last one was in the enclosure. She ran behind a slow one, tripped it. It plopped on the ground and she stomped its head in. I watched her roll it over and strip its shirt, then she used her hands to rip open the waxy flesh on its stomach. She threw up as she scooped out guts and put it on the shirt. "What does she think she's doing?" the crew of Mardi Gras said in wonder. Then she picked up the shirt and ran after another one of the last ones. She repeated it. Knocked the Z down, smashed its skull with her hiking boot and spread the guts on a shirt. The boy led the group around the far end of the track. Bem ran back onto the field and cowered under the shirt so she was covered with the gore-drenched fabric. She arranged the second shirt beside her. The boy darted across the field toward the back of the herd, then crossed back again, creating a milling confusion of Z's bouncing off each other for a moment. He dashed toward his sister and slid into a tight little ball under the second shirt. "They think they can hide," the grunting guard beside me grunted. I dropped to my knees. The weight of me ripped my arms free. Before they could recover, I jammed my hands into their gibbly bits and squeezed. Grunter grinned. They had on cups. Seriously. He swung his fist at my face. I fell on my back and felt the wind of the haymaker part my hair. Then I did the only sensible thing to do when one is on their back and surrounded by two enemy combatants who are standing. I jerked my knees to my chest and did my best imitation of a mule. Into their knees. The hinge mechanism is an incredible trait. I have marveled at mine for hours during a long run. The design is more than 90 degrees in one direction, pulled back by the hamstring, forward by the quadricep, the stability of the joint attached to the heel by the long calf muscle. A person can run fast or slow, and the knee may ache, but it's designed for forward motion. It can go in that small, limited range of motion for almost 100 years with proper care and maintenance. But if you slam a boot heel into the side of someone's knee and fold it sideways, that voids the warranty. Both emissaries fell. Both screamed. Warren added his scream to the mix. There was a lot of screaming in the press box. I bet it wasn't the first time they heard it. There was championship banner on the fence below. I would put money on the announcer screaming when they won. Now it was a distraction. And a siren. It called in more guards. But I wasn't too worried. I had a shotgun. The door burst open, and I let the first one get inside before I blasted the second back down the steps. I couldn't hear if he tumbled the men behind him. Guard number 1, or emissary number 1 through the door, wasn't going for me. He wasn't going for his gun. He put his body between me and Warren, shielding him. This could have been different. I screamed and went for the door. A slug opened a hole in the metal. I turned to the press box window and sent a bullet through it. Glass rained on the empty stands. The guard with Warren decided he was allowed to shoot. Or maybe Warren whispered it in his ear. He ratcheted up his shotgun. I tossed my empty at his face. He flinched aside, ducked his head, and took the blow across the helmet. When he looked back up, I sent the palm of my hand into his chin. A lot of guys learn to fight from movies. Truth be told, I don't like hand-to-hand combat, but if it has to happen, most people don't know how to do it. A lot of guys learn to fight from movies. Or from watching MMA fights. They think a good solid punch is going to work. It's a Rocky dream where they deliver a one-hit knockout. Except the skull is hard. If you punch with a fist, you might break a finger or knuckle. If your opponent ducks his head and you smash into the thick bone protecting the brain, you're going to be down one hand in a fight. That's why I don't like punching. I'd rather cheat and kick them in the tender parts wherever I can find them. Or a good poke in the eye works wonders. A heel strike to the chin snaps the head backwards in a direction it's not meant to go. If their mouth is open, they could bite their tongue or snap teeth. It's a move that sends a couple of signals to the brain, mostly pain signals, and the brain sends back its standard emergency response. Run. Hide. Flight. Unless you're trained for pain, it's a real distraction. The emissary's head snapped back. Blood spewed from his mouth and sprayed across Warren's white suit. I yanked the shotgun from his grip and used the butt to whack him again. It was much stronger than my hand. Then I jumped through the shattered window. 18. Chapter 18. The kids were smart. They didn't move. There were 2 lumps of clothing in the middle of the field that smelled like dead Z, and it fooled them. I pounded down the stadium stairs and hopped the end of the fence and onto the field. The Z noticed me. I checked the shotgun. 8 rounds. No time. The emissaries would be right behind me. I hoped the kids were fast. The Z started hobbling toward me. If I had time, I would have led them around the track, tried to bunch them up like the boy did, and buy the kids space to run to the fence. Save my bullets for the run from the gate to the fence. I should have planned better. A soldier perched in the lowest corner of the far set of bleachers, aimed and fired. A bullet plowed into a Z that stepped beside me. I smacked its skull in with the grip of the shotgun. Not him, screamed the general. I could see him behind the fence by the bleachers on the other side. He was practically standing up in his wheelchair, using his arms to lift and shake and shout. He dropped and pointed to the kids. The soldier nodded and aimed. I screamed. He sent a bullet into the ground beside the lump closest to him. It didn't move. Bam. Boy. I ran, shouldered down the Z that got in my way, using the shotgun like a club. Gore splashed across me, over me. A second bullet hit the lump and sent up a geyser of blood. I screamed again and stopped running, aimed with the gun and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The works were gummed up with Z-goo. He shot into the kid again. My kid. I flipped the shotgun to grip it by the slippery barrel and let the rage bubble over. He shot the second mound of clothes on the ground. I bashed. I smashed. I lunged and swung. Gore drenched my arms, my hands, drenched my shirt, my pants. There was no way to tell where Z ended and I began. All I could see was red. I ran past the kids, bullied, bashed, and crushed my way through the herd. They ignored me. The Z turned toward the gunfire and cheering soldiers. The herd shifted toward them. The dead walked past me. I went with them. The soldiers couldn't tell us apart. Neither could the emissaries lined up on the other side. 20 yards away, they either didn't see the shotgun or couldn't make it out. The soldiers started shooting Z. 15 shotguns blasting at the same time stopped them. "Don't do that," Warren called across the field. "We can get more," the general yelled back. "I think you've proven your point," Warren responded, "and broke one of my laws. They were dead anyway. I just helped them along." I moved through the Z closer to the fence. I didn't know if the shotgun would shoot, but I could climb. I could reach the one who killed my kids and rip him apart. "The law is the law," screamed Warren. "No. I am the law. Do it." The soldiers lifted their rifles and fired. 3 holes opened in Warren's face, crimson blood washing across his immaculate white suit. He fell backwards into the bleachers. His emissaries fired back. It was no contest. Shotguns fired across 30 yards by emotional men against 4 or 5 rifles held by calm-trained hands. 5 of the guards dropped before the rest stopped shooting. 2 more fell before the smoke cleared, and the rest held up their hands in surrender. I was close now. Under the soldier. The child killer. I was going to bite his throat out and feel his blood gush in my teeth. I let the rage wash up again, gripped the fence and stuck my toe in a hole to launch up. 2Z grabbed me by the arms and held me fast. They didn't moan. They looked at me. Brown eyes and hazel. My eyes and their mothers. Peering from a mask of goo and gore. I stepped down, lowered my head. "Round them up," ordered the general. He pointed his soldiers toward the emissaries. "What about the corpses?" said one of the shooters. He aimed into the Z and fired. A body dropped. Then another. "I like what they were doing here," the general grinned. "Go find out where they were keeping them and get them put back. Just leave them here for now." A soldier ran off to do his bidding. The general watched the Z, studied them. I know he was looking for me. He glared at the 2 bodies in the center of the field, searched for mine. But there were 30 to go through. I shuffled around with the Z, both kids close to me playing the part. He couldn't decide if I was one of the dead, and he couldn't find out until he cleared out the rest. I thought he was going to order them to shoot then. I would have. I think. But he didn't. He rolled away with his men, planning to come back and search later. If he was going to take over Vicksburg, he had more important things to worry about than which body was mine. At least that's what I think he was thinking. Either way, he left. It was just me and my kids. Still alive in a herd of Z. 19. Chapter 19. We couldn't talk. Talking would attract the Z. The boy tried talking with his eyes. While that worked great when telling jokes, it wasn't an effective form of communication to get us out. The soldiers guarded the emissaries while they made them clean up the other set of bleachers. That involved throwing the dead bodies down onto the football field, which made the Z herd and feast. It moved us closer to the gate where the Z were let inside. The gate that was still open. I stutter-stepped to it, shuffling and dragging a foot. I had a theory the Z responded to noise, to sight or a form of sight, and rhythm. The kids picked up on it and moved with me. Step. Drag. Shuffle. Shuffle. Step. Drag. Maybe I was being too cautious. The Z were preoccupied with fresh dead meat. They weren't paying attention to us. The soldiers were watching the guards. They weren't watching us. We disappeared into the shadows under the bleachers that led into a blockhouse locker room. In the dim interior, I stopped and pulled both kids close to me. They wrapped their arms around me and squeezed, and I wasn't sure if we would ever let go. "Dad," the boy whispered. "You stink." We giggled quietly. It was still too loud. A Z limped out of the darkness, moaning, reaching for us. I smashed it with the shotgun. A couple outside looked up from eating, gristle and blood dripping from their rotting teeth. They turned and began to lurch inside. Their movement attracted others. The herd was coming back. I grabbed each of their hands in mine and pulled them after me. We had to find a way out. I tried to picture it in my head. We had a locker room just like it at my high school. Under the bleachers, one for each team. Rows of metal lockers, wooden benches bolted to the floor. Cinder block walls with holes knocked out every 4 feet to let in natural light through a simple grate window. We ran from one pool of light to the next as the sounds of moans increased around us. There would either be a door in the middle of the building leading out, or one at the end of the building leading to a long fenced-in walkway. They were constructed this way in the South because of team rivalries. People take high school football seriously in small towns, and if a visiting team wins against the home team, it can cause skirmishes. We even had a riot break out at my high school after a game when the visiting team lost, and got in some cheap hits at the game buzzer. A couple of guys waited around and tossed rocks at the team as they left the locker room. Then beer bottles. Then words. The words were worse and led to the fights, which evolved into fights between the fans in the parking lot. The police were called. No one was arrested. No tear gas used, no nightstick beatdowns. But after that, they installed a fence that covered the walkway for the opposing team to reach the parking lot. I figured it was that kind of locker room when we reached the middle of the wall and found more metal lockers instead of a door. We kept running. I felt sticky fingers brush against my arms and lashed out with the shotgun. It whacked something that moaned. Z. I jerked my arm to bring the kids in closer, and we ran to the end of the building. There was the door. It wasn't locked. I inched it open to peek out. "Run," the boy shouted. I glanced back over my shoulder at the light that spilled through the open doorway. We were surrounded by the dead in the room. A thick wall of zombies crashing in on us. I jerked them through, then the boy lashing out with the shotgun, smashing and crashing against outstretched arms, hands, skulls. Then I was through the door and yanked it closed. An arm shoved through, blocking the way. I slammed the door over and over, blood and meat leaking down the edge. But I couldn't break the bone. The arm wedged it open, and Z fingers gripped it, trying to pry the knob from my hand. "Go," I snuffed. "Go." The sidewalk was 5 feet wide. It had fence on either side that ran to the parking lot. Riots weren't limited to just my town, and football rivalry made tempers flare. For a game. It was stupid. Especially now, considering the Z. They ran to the end of the fence and the gate that sealed the entrance. It was locked with a zip tie through the latch. Locked. I glanced around. We were exposed in here. If any soldiers heard us and came to investigate, we were fish in a barrel. Then I saw a gap at the top of the gate. I whistled. But Bem was already climbing. That girl. Scooping dead zombie guts and hiding in the corpse. Changing places with zombies when the herd crowded around them. All after Zach tried to do whatever he tried to do. And now hopping the fence before I could tell her to. The boy followed. The Z ripped the door out of my hands, and I sprinted down the walkway. I hit the fence and scrambled up and over, landing hard on the other side. We didn't have time to catch our breaths, though. The Z were loud. It would draw attention to see what was agitating them. We needed to move, and I needed to get our bearings and get us out of here. The Z hit the fence, shoved their arms through. I pushed the kids in front of me, and we raced across the parking lot. 20. Chapter 20. The streets all looked the same. Houses packed in with trailers, each of them home to someone. Maybe a family. Maybe like mine. There was confusion in the street. People milled around, drawn out by the gunfire, maybe by some of the emissaries as they escaped from the soldiers. I stopped the kids on the edge of a house and looked around. "Running is going to draw attention," I said. "Where are we going?" The boy glared. I knew it wasn't directed at me. "That was good thinking, you two, back there in the field. How did you know the smell would stop them, Bem?" She sniffed. "I didn't. I was just trying something out." I brushed a gore-stained, crusty strand of hair back from her beautiful tiny face. "Trying works. That's what we do. We keep thinking, and we keep trying, and we make it work." The boy nodded. "I thought you were going to kill them all. I got a lot of the Z. Not the zombies." He meant the soldiers. "I would have gotten more than one. Maybe not all. Then I would have been shot." "You saved me too," I told them. "If I'd gone after the soldiers, they would have shot me in the head. We look like Z, and we'd go down like them too." Someone screamed. A woman walked around the edge of the building, and just as I said we looked like Z, she saw us. Timing is a bitch sometimes. She screamed and ran. "Zombies. That decides it," I said, and led the kids in the other direction. We should have turned the Z loose from the football field. We could have used that distraction. We ran up the street and turned a corner when I heard the growl of an engine approaching the opposite way. It sounded like a bobcat tractor. I dragged the kids into a narrow space between a house and a trailer, and we crouched down, waited. The general drove past, leading a platoon of his men. I had to admit, he looked damn scary in that contraption. But he thought I was dead. I wasn't about to change his mind. Let him find out when they search the bodies in the football field. "I have an idea," the boy whispered in my ear. "Follow me." 21. Chapter 21. He led us under the trailer and out of the other side to the backyard. They were turned into what would soon be gardens too. Warren had a good plan. I wondered if the general would keep it. I could put some states between us, let the man chew on his obsession, and hope we never ran into each other again. That was my plan. The boy kept us moving over the fences, past 3 houses, 3 trailers, and to a side street. "Do you know where this goes?" He pointed to a wooden sign next to the road. It was a brown park sign, the kind with the name of the park carved into it in a throwback to historical significance. They didn't last as long as the metal signs with white words stenciled on them, but the wear of the weather made a nice sheen to the wood. It shouldn't be far. We jogged along the side of the road, headed for the park. Jogging was an instant giveaway that we weren't Z if anyone saw us. And all we had was a gory shotgun with a busted stock to stop them if they did. 22. Chapter 22. The boy hit the next corner too fast and slid in the muck. Bem grabbed him to help him up, and 2 massive hands reached out and jerked them both around the corner. I had fallen behind, dizzy from the blow to my head, from the fight, from the flight, and the adrenal dump in my system. Now that it was slowing up, the stress was making me slow. And tired. I saw them jerked away and screamed. Gloved hands so they weren't Z. But running around the corner would put me out in the open. Then she screamed. My little girl screamed, and my son shouted, a wordless howl of rage and pain. I sprinted around the corner. Grunter had Bem by the throat, holding her off the ground. His leg was wrapped tight stiff. But he had my little girl. Another emissary straddled the boy and choked him with both hands. They were giants compared to the kids, men the size of wrestlers and football players. Probably had played in the stadium my kids had just survived. "You!" Grunter screamed. He flipped around and held Bem's throat in the crook of his arm. Her little feet kicked against his chin as she tried to pull his forearm off her throat, lift herself up enough to breath. "You did this." He tightened his forearm and Bem whimpered, tried to breath. And I felt fear. Not the first time I was afraid since the Z came. But a new kind of fear. My little girl was trapped between two men the size of cows, hard beefy jerks who wanted me dead. They wanted me to hurt more than they wanted me dead, though. I knew this because they didn't shoot me. Their mistake. I screamed then. Something red. Something primal. Something that made the man on my son flinch away. The boy got his arm in an armbar, cinched his legs up over the guard's neck, and flipped him off. He leaned back on the arm hard. The snap echoed across the street. The man shrieked, but the boy didn't stop. He leaned even harder, until bone sliced through the skin and dribbled on the ground. The emissary passed out. Grunt was too caught up in killing my daughter to notice. Then I ran. I've never been fast, but a sonic boom echoed after me. A hole opened in Grunt's forehead, and the back of his head showered the ground in goo. I slammed into him, clawed his arm away, and knocked Bem loose. She dropped to the ground and scrambled toward her brother. Grunt teetered like a tree, then fell on locked knees. "They're coming," the boy shouted. We could hear them. Soldiers. Guards. More people. Too many to fight. We chose the better form of valor and ran like hell. 23. Chapter 23. By like hell, I mean we ran as fast as 3 beat-up, battered, choked, and zombie-it-covered people could run. But we made it to the entrance of the park and ducked down a tunnel of ancient oaks that lined the asphalt road before anyone saw us. I let the boy lead. He seemed to know something or have an idea, and the hit to the head, the fighting had me a little woozy. I wanted to rest. I wanted to lock us all into someplace safe and hide. But we couldn't yet. "Where is it?" I heard him mutter. "What are you looking for?" He pointed. There was a plane tied down next to a grass runway. "When did you learn to fly?" He said his stepdad's name. I didn't know the man could fly, but then again, I didn't know too much about the man that raised my children. I guess I trusted their mother enough to make a better choice than me. If he could fly, he must have shown the boy something. Bem didn't seem so confident. "This isn't a good idea," she said. Headlights on the road seemed to argue against her. "Untie it," he said. I untied the tie-downs from the end of each wing and moved the blocks from the wheels. The boy checked over the exterior of the plane, moving the wing flaps, the tail flaps. He moved inside and checked the gauges there too, though I couldn't tell you what they meant. "Keys," he called through the window. The headlights were moving through the trees slowly, outlining them in long dark shadows as they searched for us. I ran to a tiny little building next to a row of gas cans. The door was locked. I smashed the knob with a crusty shotgun and ripped it open. A teenager sat inside crying. He held out the keys on the end of his finger and sobbed. "Don't kill me." "Not today, kid." I closed the door and ran back. "Get in." The boy took the key and started the engine. I watched him play with the flaps, play with the yoke, and steer us toward the runway as he throttled. "Do you know what you're doing?" "About as much as you." He grinned and shoved us forward and raced down the runway. Damn. We were going to die. 24. Chapter 24. The plane lifted off the runway as trucks raced down the field after us. I heard the popping sounds of guns, but the boy arced us out over the river for 2 miles, then turned toward the east. "Which way?" he said through the microphone headset. "This is fine," I told him. "Stay low so we can follow the interstate." The plane was a 4-seater designed for 3. We were packed in tight, which was fine for now. I tried to make headway with the gauges. "Which one's fuel?" The boy reached up and tapped. It was full. I turned in the seat. Bem didn't have a headset on, just curled into a ball in the back seat, knees hugged to her chest. I motioned her to lean closer so she could hear me over the roar of the engine. "Are you okay?" She shrugged. "But I will be." I nodded and put my hand on her knee. She patted my bruised knuckles, and I turned back to the front. "We should just keep going west." Not without her. Dad, what do you think the chances of her making it are? I mean, seriously? You made it. But we had help. And training. She's just a kid. It was dangerous and stupid. We would be crossing across territory I had already trekked, and I knew what we faced. Somewhere in there was a mad general who wanted me dead. There were enemies created along the way. And a million more zombies trying to eat our brains. I didn't even know where she was, where she went, or where to start. Except I had seen a map. There was another one. It was at Fort Jasper, along with dozens of friends. I could check in on them, pick up Anna, and we could make our way east to search the tent cities and refugee camps. She was a smart kid, she could survive. If her mother had gotten out of the way. We're going to Alabama, I told them. My daughter took it well. Stoic, that one, and a bit too much like me. Except for the scars, though the wounds of growing up without a biological dad may have been hidden. Her stepdad was a good man. Or had been. They hadn't said much about him, or their mom yet. I wasn't going to ask. They would share when they needed to vent. I leaned back in my seat and didn't plan on closing my eyes. 25. Chapter 25. The boy nudged me awake. Birmingham, he pointed to a smudge of smoke on the horizon. You sure? Vicksburg to Jackson, Jackson to Birmingham. We made the drive a couple of times with you. I clapped him on the shoulder and pointed north. We go till we hit I-22 and backtrack to Fort Jasper. He nodded. It didn't take long. A drive that lasted an hour in the car was only 20 minutes by crow flight. We flew over Fort Jasper, or at least where I thought it was. Several miles from the interstate that we were using as a landmark. I checked the fuel gauge and tapped it with my finger. The boy nodded and keyed the microphone on his headset. Dad, I know how to fly. You did a great job, son. We made it. Yeah, but I don't know how to land. The majority of plane crashes happen on takeoff and landing. Don't ask me how I know that. They are almost always pilot error. Again, don't ask me how I know that. Do you land in the game? Nah, it's more fun to crash. Damn. I've got a pilot who crashed planes for fun. My son, the VR expert. I buckled up just in case. The end. Thank you for taking the time to read Battlefield Z, Mardi Gras Zombie. If you enjoyed it, please consider telling your friends or posting a short review. Word of mouth is an author's best friend and much appreciated. Thank you. Chris.